Yeah, I think that would be a Jackie Weaver moment. Anyway, I think we're going to start because we've gone past 6:30. So for those participants who are watching, I welcome you again to our latest Male Class Show webinar. This is, I think, our fifth, following on from a variety of topics we have discussed, or our very eminent panelists have discussed with me during the past webinars. Now, this one, we do have, I can honestly say we have a really eminent set of panelists talking about veterinary practices past, present and future. So we have Alastair Hayton, who's going to wave from Synergy Vets, Bill Boyer, who is actually sat next to him from Kingfisher Vets, and Peter Aitken from Dorset Equine. So those are our three panelists. We've been chatting away about all sorts of other things, which are completely irrelevant, but possibly similar to what they're now going to talk about with taking out glass eyes and replacing them. What we want to talk about is how they started in the veterinary profession, all the things that they did when they were young, and looking at them, that was obviously some time ago.
Thank you.
What they did, what they're doing now, and what we anticipate they're going to be doing in the future. This is, as we've said on previous webinars, a very informal chat. We're also going to do at the end a little bit about what I've been describing to them when we've been chatting about this as their James Herriot moments. So we're looking for them to regale us with some stories about their most embarrassing and their worst moments in their practice. I have explained to them that this is a tea time show, so it can't be too rude.
Yeah, no.
And possibly they will have to anonymise the events to make sure that their clients don't realise that their animal hasn't been dealt with possibly in the way that they were anticipating. So
perish the thought, Nigel, perish the thought.
Now, those of you who are watching, as before, you do have the opportunity to ask any questions, and I'll pick those up as we go along, or at the end, depending on how they all fall. So please ask any questions that you like of our panelists, and I'll see how we can deal with those. So let's start off. I think Alastair's going to start. Alastair, over to you.
Well, thank you, and first of all, good evening, and I hope everyone's enjoying finally having some warm weather. It's been miserable for far too long now, so yeah, we should have done this outside really, shouldn't we? So yeah, how did I start out? Well, yeah, try and make it not too dull. I was brought up in the northeast of England on the sort of front edge of the North Yorkshire moors, and close to the well-known holiday town of Middlesbrough. I was a very late comer to the idea of becoming a vet. I think possibly because all creatures great and small was on the time, and I was brought up 10 miles from where Alf White had his practice in Thirsk. The sort of tendency to think about it, I just put down to too much TV watching on a Sunday evening or whatever. So it was only really halfway through my A-levels that I thought, well, yeah, hang on, this could be something for me. And a week with a family friend's practice in Barnard Castle confirmed that this was something that I think suited me and something I wanted to pursue. So fortunately, I scraped through my A-levels by the skin of my chin and arrived at Edinburgh University in 88. And suffice to say, those were extremely good years. It was a very different student experience to the one that students will see now. We had very small years, 16 a year, and obviously the only 5 years, so 300 in the college. And the result of that was we didn't just know each other in the years very well, the whole college knew each other very well, and that gave it a lovely sort of collegiate family feel that retains to this day. We'd have reunions, and even 25 years down the line, about 40-50% of the year would turn up to say hello to each other. So great times up there, and obviously Edinburgh does have a lot of pubs, which helped. In between the studies at the university, we have, as vets, to do a lot of practical experience. The first 2 years are spent on farms and such like, but the last 3 years are your clinical years, and you go in your holidays off to veterinary practices to gain the necessary practical experience to take into your first job. And mine was spent in the aforementioned Barnard Castle, and particularly at Ripon, so right in the sort of Herriot country. And even in those days, a lot of that world disappeared, but every so often you got some really sort of lucky glimpses of the old life. Going to the top of the dales in the middle of the winter and see some really hard-nosed farmers. You know, they were tough. They were very tough farming up there.
Worse than around here.
They were honestly, they were the stories of them stitching themselves into paraffin vests in the winter. There's one of the farmers right on top of the dales, and the whole family used to stitch themselves into paraffin vests every winter to keep themselves warm. They were astonishing crew. Anyway, yeah, they're very good.
Our show members, they're extremely hardy and tough, as you know.
Well, all I can say is, yeah, I've yet to think. Yeah, I wouldn't want to decry the hardiness of the local farmer, but yeah, top of the dales is something special, I think. And so yeah, they were good times. The practices were extremely good practices. They were, as everyone was really at that stage, mixed practices. So there was a combination of small equine and large, and the younger vets tended to do everything, and the older vets tended to find their sort of niche and spend most of the time either doing companion or farm or whatever. I think I sort of was already showing the runes of where I was going to go when I was in a consulting room with the senior small animal plant at Ripon, and he'd asked me to take a temperature of the dog while he sorted out the notes for the client. So I dutifully took the thermometer and took the dog's temperature, and without thinking, unfortunately, then proceeded to wipe the thermometer on the back of the dog so I could read the bulb, much to the absolute horror of, as you can imagine, of both client and vet. And it was particularly unfortunate because it was a Westie, so you could hardly notice the result. So yes, I think I was already starting to show a tendency that maybe companion animal work wasn't going to be where I was going to end up. So yeah, that was the student experience, and from there, those days came to an end, and off to my first job, which looked on the face of it a fantastic job in Bakewell, middle of the Peak District, beautiful small rural mixed practice, everything you might sort of aspire to. Unfortunately, it was anything but. It was a nightmare, and I think there are one or two vet students listening to this, and the biggest advice I can give you is make sure that whoever you work for is supportive. I went to a practice where and which is typical, that you were throwing everything, but when you're throwing everything and not given any support, that's particularly tough. And my second ever call was to a cesarean, bovine cesarean, and by the end of the week, I think I'd dealt with every major emergency that you were trained for. I
had a very similar experience to Alastair, actually, and my first night on call, I had a cow cesarean. Phoned up the partner and said, I've got a cow cesarean, and he said, oh, we don't do cow cesareans. And so I had to just go and grab some kit, and I mean, fortunately, I'd seen a lot of practice with my home practice, dairy practice, and they were pretty routine for me. So I'd say the same thing to any students listening. Make sure you pick your job very carefully.
So yeah, it was a toxic combination of huge amounts of stress. You were flying around. It was definitely the days where you were in a sort of Herrick world of charging off the odd sick cow here, the lame cow there, the little TB test here, and so you'd have innumerate calls. You were days obviously before computers and sat navs and mobile phones, so you learned to drive with an OS map on your knee and an eye on the road, and you self-guide yourself to a farm with no visible entrance and so on and so forth. So suffice to say, I think I ended up still holding the record at Edinburgh University for the number of car crashes in 1 year. I managed 6 in 3 months, including going through a caravan, which was obviously not good for the caravan, certainly wasn't good for me, and definitely not good for the holiday makers on the way to there. It wasn't a good time. So that, not surprisingly, was a job that came to a very abrupt end, and I escaped there and went to the antithesis of a practice in Cirencester with some absolutely lovely people to work for. Very similar job on the workload front, but it just shows the difference a good set of people to work for, understanding set of people to work for can make. And the difference was I think from there, hopefully blossomed a bit and flourished and started getting my teeth further and further into farm practice. And I think at that point, I shall leave my story and give Phil a go.
Right. Well, I never wanted to be a vet. I mean, that sounds a bit like a Monty Python line, but I never even thought about it. I was son of a dairy farmer in South Somerset, I probably in my early life led a Jersey cow around Mill Class show. Certainly that was my sort of
win, Phil, did you win?
When?
Did you win?
Oh yeah, we got stacks and stacks of certificates at home. I mean, Dorchester, Shaftesbury, Gillingham were regulars. My dad was Jersey steward at Mid Somerset show for years and years and years. Anyway, I'd always presumed I was going to be a farmer. I never really thought of anything else. And my brother was going to agricultural college, so that was a natural thing for me. The other thing is that the vets that came to our farm, I mean, the vets who are listening, or the vet students may well have heard of Paul Greenough, who wrote the first major book on cattle lameness. We had Don Collick, who was also a lameness guru, one of the first people to get a diploma in bovine reproduction. And I mean, to me, they were gods. There's no way that mere mortals like myself could aspire to a profession like that. Anyway, the problem was that although I was at a state school, the success of the school was judged by the headmaster to be the number of people who got into Oxbridge. And Oxford and Cambridge don't do an agricultural course. So he pulled me to one side and said, look, they don't do agriculture at Oxford or Cambridge. But had you thought about veterinary medicine? He said, well, it's sort of, it's to do with animals and farmers. I'm sure that would do. So with that persuasive argument, I ended up at Cambridge Vet School. My student experience, I'm not sure I sort of was probably quite as good as Alastair's. It was extremely stressful and really hard work. I mean, although we had 6 years, and Alastair only had 5. I mean, it was still really hard work. And I think although, it was 2 or 3 A levels at grade A to get in, that was the easy bit. The getting through the course was really tough. But having got there, I was absolutely determined I was going to come out the other end. I was probably fairly fortunate to get in. This was a time of Alf White, otherwise known as James Herriot. And there were 100 people applied for my position at college. So, I think to get in, I thought, right, I'm not letting go of this. I'm going to get through. Ironically, coming out the other end of college, there were no jobs. So, I mean, it's a very small profession. At that time, 9,000 people on the register, about 400 or 500 people coming out of vet schools every year. And you just small changes in supply and demand made a huge difference. I mean, nowadays it's done a complete U-turn in that the profession's 33,000. There's about 1,000 coming out of vet school, and you just cannot employ vets nowadays. There are none there to be had. Part of it there's been a shift now. 83% of the graduates are female. In my day, we were the last year to go through college where males were in the, numbered more. And females do tend to drop out of the profession. So again, that's a sort of a bit of a wastage in terms of numbers. The other thing that's happened recently is about 3 years ago, a quarter of the vets in the country were from the EU. And since Brexit, half of those have gone back to Europe. So now it's a hugely different thing. But when I qualified, there was an average of 60 people looking at every job. Now, I did have a rather duff first job. And the first weekend I was there, I was looking for other jobs. And I did discover the technique for getting a job was as soon as the vet record hit your mat on a Saturday morning, you grabbed it, looked for jobs that were half decent and accessible, phone them up and say, I'm going past your door later in the day, can I come for an interview? Irrespective of whether you're going anywhere near them or not. And that worked for me. I got an interview in a practice in Market Harbour in South Leicestershire. They had 65 people apply. I went there on a Saturday afternoon. Monday morning, I got a call saying, yeah, come and work for us. And I found out subsequently they'd interviewed 2 of us and they said either of you would have done. They were both, myself and the other chap was from my year at college. And they said, well, the difference was he had an earring and you didn't. And that was anyway, so I ended up in a very mixed practice. And again, the difference in those days was that everybody wanted to go to a mixed practice. You needed to learn about the different species and put it into practice. And it gave you a chance to work out if what you were planning to do was the right thing for you. So, you know, I was planning to be a farm vet, but I wanted to try my hand at other things as well. So we were about 30% equine, 30% small animal, 40% farm work. Fantastic experience. Lots of hunters around there. So your Saturday afternoons were spent stitching up hunters. And I mean, my boss there was master of Fernie Hunt. And I mean, he just did equine work. And whenever I was working with him, he never actually made a diagnosis. It was always, well, rest for 6 weeks and you know, it'll be okay. And if
that's, you know, equine veterinary, isn't it?
Well, exactly. If you say
diagnosis is very overrated. Wouldn't dwell on it. Treatment's more important.
And a client said the same thing to me. He said every time Roger's been out to me, he's never actually made a diagnosis. He just tells me to rest the horse for 6 weeks. So that was how I started out. So what's your thought, Peter?
Peter obviously going to have to deal with this slur on the equine veterinary practice to start with. We've obviously got to start. We've got Alastair, who is a nightmare driving a car, and Phil, who's obviously politically incorrect upbringing with people with earrings and things like that. So that's you, Peter, have got the stage now to explain why the equine field is much better.
Hard to match those. I mean, my background coming into the vet thing was probably very similar to the other two, same sort of vintage. So I came from a medical family. My father was a GP in Swanage, so I grew up in a medical family. My mother was a doctor, paediatrician. My grandfather was a doctor. So I came from a very medical family, and that was sort of very scientific family, and that was my initial interest. But then I realised I was more of a outdoorsy sort of person, I think, really where it came to. So I decided that I told my father, age 5, actually, that I didn't wish to be a doctor. I didn't wish to work as hard as he did, and that was a very astute 5-year-old. And I don't know what went wrong, because you know the GPs stopped doing out of hours about 15 years ago, and I'm still doing a 1 in 3 or something. So I don't know where it went wrong, but that 5-year-old knew what he was talking about. But so I had a medical background, but I was a bit more outdoors. So someone suggested, how about going around with a local vet? And he was a lovely man called Mike Ranger, who lived in Swanage, had enormous whiskers out here, permanently smoking a pipe, which I think just used to sort of waft under his nose. So when you were dealing with some particularly unpleasant cleansing or something, you were just in a cloud of slightly nicer atmosphere. And he'd put it down to do whatever it was, put his hand in a cow, then get his hand back out and revive the pipe and back go. And that is how he spent his day. And I went around Purbeck, really, primarily in South Dorset with him in the car, an old Volvo, and mostly doing farm stuff, which it wasn't it, in those days, mixed practice. And just thought, what a lovely lifestyle, really. We used to stop, as you say, before mobile phones and sat nav and everything else, we used to stop. He knew where every phone box was in the practice, and you had a bag of 10p's in the glove box, and you used to stop at each phone box. You had to ring into the practice to see if there were any more calls, and that was how I did it, which actually was probably in advance when my father started practicing as a GP in Swanage. He needed to drive around, and when they went through Langton, there was a lady, there was a patient, and she had a telephone, and very few people in Langton had a telephone at the time. And the practice used to ring, and if there were any more calls for the doctor, she used to hang a flag out of the window. And you would see it from his car. He was driving down the Langton and go in her house to make a phone call. So it sounds like it could have been 150 years ago, but I suppose it was. So I started here on Mike Ranger, and I just like that sort of country driving around Dorset, ambulatory practice, which is what I do now, really. And that's really what got me interested into vet school. Went to vet school. I went to the Royal Vet College in London. Very similar to how you describe Alastair, really. We were about 70 a year then, which seemed like quite a lot compared with other vet schools, but of course nothing compared with today, but 350 in the whole college. And as you say, you didn't know any of the people in your year, but you knew everyone and everyone else, particularly if you played sport, ice skating and rugby, so straight away you knew the people from the older years. And we were like one big giant family, and you made lifelong friends, which very much today, and I would still say that's one of the best things about becoming a vet was the friends I made at that time. And it's a pity, isn't it? I mean, it is what it is, but that the years have got so big that the student experience has, I don't know, I'm sure that maybe there's some pros and cons, but it's definitely changed, hasn't it?
Did you remember working hard, Peter? I don't remember this working hard bit at all. That's a curious one.
That is, I'm not sure that was a different planet. I don't know where that's come from. I mean, we had 5 years of an absolute ball. I remember thinking, you know, we had a grant to go to university. I mean, you got paid £2,000 and you used to moan and think, how on earth can I possibly afford 5 pints a night if they're only going to pay me £2,000? And we had a lovely time. And then at the end, when you qualified, you thought, crikey, I've had a very good time, but I don't know very much, and I need to learn very fast from anyone who's prepared to teach me anything, whether it be a farmer, a vet nurse, or anyone you were just thinking, please, you know, I need to learn very fast. But I don't remember that hard work. What college was that?
Well, there was a difference, because at Cambridge you got exemption from your second MBs or second vet MBs rather than sitting the same exam as the other vet schools. And those that failed that exam then got a chance to sit the same exam as the other vet schools. And those people that had to do resits always went through with flying colours. So probably we were being set a higher bar. I'm sure that's all it was.
Higher bar had a different context where I went.
We dealt with how you graduated, which is great. And I'm pleased that when I went to university, I also had a grant, but the beer was only 9 pence a pint. So actually your grant did go some way, but anyway, that's another subject. What are you doing now then? You obviously, the reason you've been so kind as to join us is you're all now specialists. Phil, obviously in small animals, Alastair is saying in farm, but as Peter had to wait, so perhaps you go first this time. Peter, equine matters, that's your specialism.
Yeah, so I was at mixed practice, and actually, again, in mixed practice, you do a bit of everything. I had no intention of really becoming a horse vet. Actually, in fact, I barely touched a horse before I went to uni, and the only exam I failed at university was the horse handling exam. So, but I hadn't any previous. But I went into mixed practice, and then I found I enjoyed the equine side of it. I liked ambulatory practice. I did that, and then I was lucky enough. I got a job at Liphook Equine Hospital, which is a big equine hospital in Hampshire. One of the first really big private referral hospitals. And I was there for 5 years, and it's one of those places where you feel you don't know very much because all the senior vets just absolutely know so much. But when you come out the other end, you realize you've learned a lot. And that's where my equine interest came. So I worked various places. I went and worked in New Zealand for a while, which I'd traveled to before. And then at some stage, I decided to come back. Having sort of traveled a fair bit, I thought Dorset was probably actually as good as anywhere really in the world, and came back to Dorset to set up a practice. So I started Dorset Equine Vets here. We're based at Whitcomb Racing Stables near Dorchester, and started in 2004. And we've been here ever since. And we are a first opinion. We've got ambulatory and clinic facilities, so a bit of both. I'll probably do about, I don't know, 70% of my time out on the road, 30% of the time here. We have Graham, who's the anaesthetist. He does the anaesthetics for the ops. Yeah, so we cover West Dorset, South Somerset predominantly. Well, really, I still go back to Purbeck. I have a Purbeck day every week, which always feels like a bit like a holiday, really. I just go around and visit all my old friends and chat and drink tea, and the office complain I'm running very late. And then the rest of the week, I've spent a lot of time in West Dorset, do a lot of race work up with all the people like, you know yourself, Nigel, with a lot of racing yards, Harry Fry and Honeyball, but all the barbers, various. So I'm up that. I do a fair bit of race, especially in the jump racing season.
Are you out, you're saying? Because obviously it's slightly different to people bringing small animals, let's say, to Phil's clinic. So most of yours, people don't bring their horses to you, presumably, unless it's to specialist facilities. Is that fair?
A bit of both. I mean, for example, if you've got a lame horse, you can choose to look at it at the client's premises, and we do. And a lot of the kit, like the X-ray kit, is very portable now. It probably is easier if you have a clinic to do it here, because you might have a level trot up, and you might have we've got a hard circle, an indoor school, so we might have and there might be more nursing people on hand to help with X-raying and nerve blocking and whatever. So there are some advantages about coming in, but nonetheless, it's often more convenient for the client for you to do it at their yard. So we do the majority of the stuff at people's yards. And one of the big things I think has changed, which obviously changed everything, but with the advancing of kit, portable kit has got so much better. So ultrasound, endoscopy, X-ray, all that stuff is so much more portable. It's much easier to do it out on yards than it used to be.
But sorry, that's the equine view on life at present. Phil.
Right, so mine was a slightly more convoluted route to becoming a small animal vet. So I had three very, very happy years in Market Harborough, and I mean, one thing about starting your job in those days was that you actually were thrown into doing everything. Nowadays, there are a lot more referral centres around. So there's a tendency, rather than get on and do things, you refer them. In those days, there were no referral centres other than the 5 vet schools, 6 vet schools, and probably the Animal Health Trust at Newmarket. So, you know, if you had a plating to do, you got on and did it yourself. If you had I don't know, I mean, one of my first evenings on duty, I had a caesarean came in, and we just did the duties on our own. This is a bitch caesarean. In fact, I did it with the owner of the bitch acting as anaesthetist. So I told her what to do, how much to turn the gas up. I got on and did the surgery. When the puppies came out, her job was reviving them. At that point, I had to do the anaesthetic and the surgery and just quickly wash my hands in between handling the anaesthetic machine. And you know, those things were absolutely fantastic for experience. And I mean, I got to do, you know, I was castrating colts. I mean, even doing a vetting, I dread to think, you know, what that was like for the client. But I thought I'd better fail it to be on the safe side. I didn't want to get sued for, yeah. Anyway, so that was brilliant. But then I went on to a dairy practice in Cheshire. I think at that time it was the biggest practice in the country. We had 27 vets. 8 of us were doing dairy work, and again, fantastic experience because we each had our own area. So each of the 8 dairy vets were working in their own area, had to pretty much do everything themselves. I mean, one experience I had there was a Sunday evening. I was on call, and we had one farm vet on call at a time. They were backed up by an equine vet if we really got stuck. And I had a Sunday evening where a calving came in. I was out in a field quite a long way from the farm. The cow couldn't get up, and it was a caesarean. And when I called back into the surgery to say what I was doing, they said, "Oh, we've got 6 more calvings for you," and they weren't joking. So I suddenly had 7 calvings, and I actually had we managed to mobilise 5 other vets, and then I did my caesarean and went on and did the other calving, the last calving, and I mean, it's a great, fantastic learning experience. So I had a couple of years up there in Cheshire. Another advantage was that it was in striking distance of Derby. Now, I had a part share in a season ticket for Derby County, so you could actually do your Saturday morning's work and get down to the baseball ground in time for a match.
Phil's got a strong line.
The muddiest pitch. Wasn't the baseball ground about the muddiest pitch in Britain, I seem to remember?
Oh, well, I don't know about that. I mean, it's obviously Pride Park now, but yeah. I mean, Alastair was completely the opposite. As soon as he got the chance to move south away from Middlesbrough, you know, so he had no reason to go and watch, and that was.
We might be stopping to share a screen in a second.
Yeah. So anyway, I had a couple of years working there, and actually was offered a partnership, and 2 of us. So a chap who was a very good mate of mine also was offered partnership, and I was going to go for it. But just at that time, my home practice in Castle Carey were also advertising, and I had a real sort of, oh, what am I going to do here? I'd always had sort of hankerings to come back home, and that's what I decided to do. So I came back to South Somerset, having been doing dairy only. Now, I mean, the practice there was, I was doing about 90% farm work and 10% small animal, but there was an element of small animal. Another great experience for me because I knew a lot of the farmers anyway. I knew my way around. It was great. But I did actually quite enjoy the 10% of small animal work I did. Something else that I found there was that a couple of the older partners could no longer really do their job from a physical point of view. Bad backs, bad shoulders, and they were really wanting to do small animal work because it wasn't so physical, but they just didn't really have the aptitude or the knowledge to do it. And the practice was really sort of carrying them, I suppose. Now, I was eventually, well, after about 5 years, there was a chance of partnership there, but there were things about it where I just thought, I'm not sure about this. And we were always told that going into a partnership, picking your partners is more important than picking your partner in a marriage. I'm not sure whether my wife probably would agree with that actually, but so at the same time, there was a job available in what was Wilkins and Partners in Crewcombe, now Kingfisher Veterinary Practice. And I knew the practice because my wife worked there. She's a vet as well. So I went there, again, to do farm work mainly, but there was about 30% small animal work, so I was doing a little bit more. And I found that actually I did enjoy that. I enjoyed the farm work. I mean, I did quite a lot of mastitis and cell count sort of consultancy work, and Alastair and I ran a few mastitis courses, didn't we? But I did enjoy the small animal work. And as time went on, so the practice was about 30% small animal, 70% large animal, few horses, but that was gradually changing towards 50-50. And I was quite happy for my role to change. So I was sort of changing and doing more and more small animal as that side expanded. And we got to the point where I actually had a bad shoulder as well. I mean, there were 5 of us in the practice all going to the same consultant for shoulder problems. And I think he was thinking of writing it up as a occupational hazard. And at that point I thought, right, I'm going to concentrate on small animal work. I'd actually gone on an ultrasound course. Ultrasound back then, so early noughties, I suppose it was fairly new. We were using them for fertility work in cattle. Hadn't really come into first opinion practice for small animals, but I did go on a 4-day course. Fantastic. And what came from that was, having done that course, they phoned me up and said, "Well, we're doing a certificate in small animal medicine. Are you interested?" I think they just needed to make the course viable by getting enough people, but I hadn't really thought about that. I went and did that, a 2-year course. It was sort of almost like a day release course, and came out the other end with a certificate in small animal medicine. I mean, I was rather old to be doing it. I think there were 2 of us who were in our late 40s. Everybody else had been qualified about 2 or 3 years. I mean, most of these youngsters went on and did fantastic things in small animal referral centres and that sort of thing. But it was brilliant for me for boosting my confidence. And suddenly I was a sort of leading small animal person in the practice. And that's how I ended up where I am today.
Somebody's emailed in a question, or put a question really up to you, Phil, really. Because of the changes, or their perceived changes in small animal practices, is it right that corporates, because there seems to be sort of corporates coming in and dealing with small animal practices or trading as small animal practices, is that going to take over and the Kingfishers and the similar smaller practices will disappear?
Well, it already has, Nigel. So at the moment, over 50% of small animal practices are now part of corporates, which is a euphemism for saying they've been bought by corporates. I did have a quick tot up, and I think of practices within about 15 miles of Melplash. There's something like 17 small animal surgeries, and something like 13 of them now belong to corporates. And people wouldn't necessarily know that. The one that we're part of is called Independent Vet Care, which is a slight sort of contradiction in terms, because independent suggests you're not part of a corporate, but actually their ethos is, if the practice is successful, which I think we are, they leave us alone. And from one day when we were Kingfisher, a partnership, myself, Alastair and Jonathan, to the next day where we were owned by a corporate, and actually I was clinical director from that point on, the clients wouldn't have known any different. The only difference was what was on our headed paper. And so they let you then carry forward, the ethos of the practice. You wouldn't really notice any change. there are, there are downsides and upsides, which, I can talk about later. I'm just aware that Alastair wants to say a bit here.
There's also a related question, which is something which is very topical. I heard and this question's come in, and so I shall slightly elaborate on this. The question really is, have you seen a huge uptake in people with small animals during the pandemic? Because I heard on the radio today that Pets at Home, their turnover has gone to the £1 billion mark this year, boosted by the increase in people interested in dealing with small animals during the pandemic.
I'm sure that is correct. I'm slightly, I was actually on the government shielding list during the pandemic, so I haven't spent a huge amount of the last year at work. I've either been on furloughed or on unpaid leave, but I do know that the turnover of the practice has hardly been affected by the pandemic, despite the fact that most of the consultations were telephone or video consultations. And I mean, out of hours, things were quieter. So people, obviously were reserved about coming in, but probably the fact that turnover stayed the same. Yes, there are more people with pets around. And I've been back at work now for about a month. And yes, it's getting very busy. And I think it's going to get even more busy. But there is the veterinary profession, the small animal side of the profession has always been very resilient. So if there's economic collapse in the practice, it's one of the best businesses to survive. And I mean, I think that's what brought the corporates in, because they see it as a good investment. And yes, I think you're absolutely right. We're going to be very, very busy. Yeah.
Not quite so resilient as the funeral trade, but other than that. So, Alastair.
But that's mostly owned by the corporates as well, isn't it?
Yes, that's true. Alastair, look, farm animals. See, you've morphed into now this farm animal vet, Synergy Vet, based in Evershot.
Yeah. So I think the path of my career and the path of practice has been, well, similar to what you were discussing for all professions, really, with increasing knowledge and a need for increasing specialism, because you just can't keep abreast of everything. But obviously with farming, and particularly the dairy farm, which is the area I've been most involved in, it's followed the symptom of fewer dairy farms, but those farms having a lot more cattle and being generally producing much higher yields, and also the fact that making a profit is an incredibly difficult thing to do. So the need to be very good at what you do has resulted in needing vets who are highly specialised in their knowledge of farm animal health and production, and that's then, so it's a sort of inevitable trail behind the changes in farming and the increases in knowledge on the subject. And now, when I sort of in the early 2000s, I was doing postgraduate qualifications and trying to take myself up to a high level as I could, but you still ended up, in a sort of diploma in cattle health and production. But nowadays, really, you'd be specialising in an area, nutrition or mastitis or fertility, because every area in itself has become a specialism, and therefore the sort of move to Synergy was a combination of the fact that there was two practices either side of the hill, if you like, one in Dorset where my wife worked, and some fantastic practitioners working out of it, and we were working in Crewcombe, based in Crewcombe, and I'd like to think we were half reasonable as well.
So we had the numbers and they had the quality.
Is that what you're something saying? Like that, yeah. And the logic of putting ourselves together, because of the ability to, rather than reinvent the wheel, both sides of the hill, join our specialist forces and create hopefully an even better service for our clients, seemed a very logical step to take. So that's where we are, and I think obviously the clients will be the ones to ultimately tell you and judge, but judging by the fact that we started with 15 vets and we're now at 44 vets, I think that's a reasonable testament to the logic that what we did was the right way to go.
A question, Alastair, for you is coming in. What type of farm animal do you prefer treating? Sheep, cattle, goats?
I'm cattle. I've got a very soft spot for cattle, and I always will do. Yeah. So yeah, fantastic animals, much more sensible than horses in my opinion.
I can't really argue that.
You quite like alpacas, don't you?
Yeah, well, I did actually. My one diversion from cattle was I was the vet for Cricket St Thomas when it existed for about, I think I did it for about 10 years. I can't quite remember when I took over, but that was always that was a great thing for me because I devoured Gerald Durrell when I was a child, so I always had this fascination with the zoo and the exotic stuff. And I mean, bearing in mind when Phil was talking about the sort of depth. I think there was one lecture in exotic animals when I was at Edinburgh, and I missed it. So I think I was in the pub, and so there was a steep learning curve to be had when you suddenly faced a zebra and cheetah and the macaques and whatever else and hornbills. But that was a fantastic experience in its right, and real privilege to have done that work. But yeah, cattle otherwise.
What about going forward then, all three of you? What's going to happen? Is tech going to take over? For example, how do you see the world in, let's say, 5 years' time for each of you?
Well, shall I go first?
Well, yeah, because I mean, techs in farm and practice are quite a big thing now, aren't they?
Tech is, I mean, I think beyond still trying to need to make a profit, the other thing that's clearly kind of an impact on farm in the UK is the whole global warming issue and the carbon. I think it's a massively distorted and misunderstood area, and very, very frustrating to hear how the media put it out, because I don't think anywhere near the proper understanding, and hopefully that's coming. I think come the next COP conference we might get a better, more rational view of what farming is doing, but there we go. That's a different story for a different day. But the need to be efficient, which sounds a horribly cold word when you're talking about farming animals, but in that sense it means minimizing disease and and the impacts that reduce animals' health and productivity is where we have to be, because if we can do that, it means we can have less animals to produce the same amount of food. So it's a nice thing to go for, because it's hand in hand with better welfare. Hopefully we reduce our antibiotic usage and we save the planet. So and tech will come significantly into that, and the vet's role, I think, probably not in 5 years' time, but I was thinking by the time I was my age now that it may well be the routine visit where we hand up the back end of the cow, which is obviously the archetypal view of a cow vet would be disappearing, and that inline meters would be telling the farmer everything they need to know how to manage the cow and when to serve her to get her in calf and such like. But that hasn't happened, and I think for all that those systems are being developed, they're still a little way off. But tech will come, and it'll be helping the precision. I think we're looking to a world where farming will have to become more and more precise for the very reasons I said, that we need to become more efficient. And our role will be interpreting our role will be helping interpret the data we're getting from that tech and devising the best outcomes in terms of what needs to happen to change the course to get ourselves on a better track. It's still very fascinating. Nutrition alone is a massively interesting and complex subject, and we're still learning. But if someone had told me nutrition would be one of my favorite subjects as a student, I would have just fallen over. It was taught so badly, but actually it's endlessly fascinating and incredibly complex and way beyond my intellect. But it's going to be interesting. It's interesting, but there's definitely going to be, I still think, a very strong future for farm animal vets.
Peter alluded to improved technology generally. He was talking about the present. So, Peter, same question. How do you see it in the equine world taking over, or you've reached a point where you think there'll be a slow improvement, or where do you see it going?
Well, I think the key, as I did say earlier, exactly that. It's got incredibly, the advances in our lifetime, our working lifetime, are huge, and that will continue. So the basic things like, for example, an X-ray. And when we first X-rayed, when we first qualified, I remember having an X-ray was such a great thing that the practice would, when they're trying to attract you to the job, to say, Ormod Cons X-ray, etc. And that was just an X-ray that you damp, it was a film, and you had to go in the dark room and fumble around in the dark and put it in the developer and rinse it in the fixer, which used to sting in all your cuts from your carvings, and hang it on the washing line. And that was literally to drip dry. And then automatic processors came in, and that was an enormous step forward. And then we have digital X-ray. Now we have digital X-rays. We've got one here, and now the digital X-rays, and the plate is wireless. You just hold up. I've got one here. That's a digital plate. So it's like having a mobile phone. You point the generator at it, you fire it off, and the image comes up instantly on a laptop. The generator is wireless. The plate's wireless. You can enhance the image, and that's been massive advance for lameness and that sort of thing. So I think that is just symptomatic of how everything's progressing. So endoscopy, for example, looking up horses' noses using fibre optoscopes. I know Jeff Lane, who comes down, used to be a specialist at Langford, and comes down and does our Windocs for us. And he can remember when there were only two endoscopes in the country, and one was at Langford and one was with, I think, Rossdale's at Newmarket. And that's just your basic endoscope. And then before you know it, literally every horse vet in the country has got one in the car. And now you have a video endoscope. You can do, as you know, probably the Nigel, overground endoscopy, where you can actually I did one the other day. You put the scope in, you send the horse up the gallops, and so you can actually, it's transmitted to the laptop. You can look at it in real time. You can look at it afterwards, and so suddenly you can actually see what's going on and what's going on under race conditions. MRI, CT, all that sort of thing. So it's really, really progressed. The only thing I'm not sure about is the affordability of it. So, for example, every lame horse, you can nerve block it, say it's in the foot. Well, there would be an advantage to do an MRI on that and see what it is. But the MRI might cost 1,500 quid, £2,000. And every single lame horse doesn't want to have a 2,000 bill, especially if it might be pus in its foot and burst out of its coronet a week later. So the technology, I think, is really advancing, will continue to do so. But I'm not sure that it won't be appropriate for every case to get to expose to all that technology every time.
I'd agree with that. From the small animal point of view, that's absolutely the case. So I think first opinion practice is going to carry on doing a similar thing to what we're doing now, in terms of whether corporates are going to carry on with their sort of increasing penetration of the market. I don't really know. I think there is going to be a limit there, where actually some of the vets in corporates are going to be thinking, actually, I want my own practice. I'm going to go out and set up, and we might get a bit of a swing the other way. I mean, the corporates have been great for standardization and making sure that the standards are reasonable. I mean, hopefully the average standard is going up, but it's stemming thirsty somewhat. But with what, the toys, the ultrasound, the digital X-rays, and so forth. I mean, we've got anaesthetic monitoring equipment now, which it tells you the patient's blood pressure. It tells you how much sugar there is in the surgeon's coffee. I mean, it does absolutely everything. I mean, as a corollary to that, and where we're going, I think vet nurses are playing an increasing role in how we work. So, vet nurses can now do minor surgery. It has to be done under the supervision of a vet. So actually, in a first opinion practice, there may not be a great advantage because the vet still needs to be there. But, I think that might sort of develop. The nurses will actually monitor anaesthetics, and they certainly know a lot more about all these fantastic multi-parameter machines that we've got for monitoring the anaesthetics than I do. The vet is still responsible, but they do take a lot of pressure off you. So that's great. But there is this problem of referral centres. I mean, referral centres are everywhere now, and they're all absolutely brilliant. They've got MRIs, they've got CT scanners. It's wonderful. But what about the poor animal that doesn't have insurance? The owner hasn't got very much money. I mean, there's still place for the first opinion vet to be doing their best with those. So I think we're going to carry on with those cases. Insurance has gone up incredibly in price, but then the cost of treatment and what cost has also gone up. They're starting to talk about now dialysis, heart bypass surgery. These are things that are coming in, not for opinion practice. So in the States, I think it's now becoming not uncommon that you might have a dog that has regular dialysis for kidney failure. Certainly in this country, I think RVC, they're doing bypass surgery on hearts, replacing valves and this sort of thing. I do worry about ethics and, dogs, cats having dialysis. is it in their best interest, or is it actually in the owner's interest? The owners think they're doing the right thing. And I think there are judgments to be made there, but we have to just tread carefully. Yeah, I think that's my bit, Nigel.
Okay. Well, I'm keen to get on to that. I know quite a few of our participants are also waiting to hear your James Herriot moments. But before I get on to that and ask you those, an interesting question has come in, which is really for Alastair. Do you think the veterinary profession needs to lend their weight to the dairy sector to persuade the supermarkets that selling milk as a loss leader will ultimately lead to the end of dairy farming in this country? So quite an interesting political question there, but your short answer, Alastair, as opposed to a hugely long answer. I'm just conscious of time.
I don't think you can. I think that's a very complex question, because if you've got a line contract, the supermarket's been extremely good for the liquid milk producer. The problem is the middle milk. And I think actually, if you look at the overall market, the prices that we face in the dairy sector are as much to do with middle milk, and which is going into processing, and it's very little to do with where the supermarkets are going. And supermarkets are going. You can't blame a supermarket for being a supermarket. It's a natural beast. They have to compete hard within their sector, and while it can be intensely frustrating, the issue is always largely going to be about supply and demand. And when we have too much of produce, the prices are going to be not where we want them, and clearly they haven't been where we want them for a long, long time. So while I've got massive sympathy for, and it's very frustrating, I think I've spent 20 years or more working at an industry that largely sometimes feels constantly in recession, and certainly, the sort of struggles is very obvious to us. But I'm not sure that I would take the analysis that the supermarkets are the root of the problem. They are doing what they need to do. And actually, so I think, to be fair to the supermarkets, much of what they've done in terms of in the farms they're working with has been massively beneficial to, and I've been on a number of farmers in Cheshire this last week who would be echoing that where they've come in the last 10 years has been hugely beneficial. But clearly, those are farmers that have an aligned contract supplying that supermarket.
Thank you. Right. The little bit that we introduced. Come on then, you spill the beans.
Well, I was just thinking about farmers in Cheshire, actually. When I was working up there, I was doing a routine visit, and they said, "Oh, while you're here, can you castrate the tomcat?" I said, "Well, yeah, fine, that's okay." So they brought the tomcat round to me in a box. I injected him. I said, "Right, I'll go and do a few PDs, and then we'll come back to them in a minute." And so I was doing my PD. I was just about ready to go back and do the job, and somebody came through and said, "The cat's died. The cat's dead." And it's one of those moments where you think, all right, it's only a farm cat, but I don't really want this to happen. And so I went through and looked in the box, and there the cat was, sleeping nice and soundly. And I said, "No, that's fine. That's how I want him. Perfect." Oh, when the last vet did it, we had to hold the cat down. So they weren't used to the fact that we were meant to be using anaesthetics on cats for castrating.
Okay. Perhaps you've got to say that at Kingfisher you definitely do use anaesthetics.
Well, we try to, yeah, usually works, yeah.
Yes. Alastair?
I think the problem is that a lot obviously will have to be told after several pints when I've got to see the person I'm talking to. So I'm going to choose my first ever evening consultation back in Bakewell, and I was a lady and a teenage daughter were brought in, and they brought a cat in that had been unfortunately caught in a trap, and had been a large abscess that had developed as a result of being caught in this trap, and it'd been under treatment, and they were coming in for a final checkup. And I looked and saw this area that looked a bit puffy on the cat's neck, and thought, well, that might still be a bit of infection there. So I said, "I'll just get a needle and we'll just see what's going on there." And so pushed it into the area, and a little pus came out, at which point the daughter, who was with the mother, went spark out, collapsed totally unconscious on my consulting room floor, which was a bit bit of a sort of, whoa, I haven't been trained for this. This was new territory. I was now looking, what on earth do I do? So I thought, well, hang on, I will pop out and get some advice. So I said, excuse me to the mother, and I'll just go and get some help, and popped out the consulting room door, and there was Trevor, who is this lovely guy, assistant, about 6 years qualified at the time. So, Trevor, can you give me a hand? And he went, yeah, no problem. You know, keyed up because that I might want some help. Dived off, put on his white coat, walked in, stepped over the unconscious lass on the floor and started looking at the cat. And I had to point out, while I tried to have a fairly relaxed consulting room sort of demeanour, the problem wasn't the cat, it was the unconscious 17-year-old on my consulting room floor that I really wanted some help with. So yeah, it was an introduction to the way things can go a bit sillily wrong, but I thought that was a tellable story.
I think that's a classic James Herriot moment. Peter?
Same thing.
About cats, but possibly not about cats. Possibly.
You want one about cats or not? Did you say?
No more cat stories. I think.
Okay, no. I remember castrating a cat on the coast in New Zealand. It was about 2 hours away from the surgery, and we'd forgotten the anaesthetic, so that was a long trip back. No, it's exactly that. No.
What size Wellington did you have to use?
What was that?
I said, what size Wellington boot did you have to use?
Yeah, just a lot of sedation. But I don't remember embarrassing moments. I remember doing a locum job down in Cornwall, and that was a mixed job, and doing quite a lot of farm work, and finding it quite hard to win the confidence of the local farmers as a sort of young locum. And I went to a farm for the first time, and it was a carving, and one of those sort of tiny sort of stone shippen with a sort of, a ceiling that you couldn't really stand up straight, and a big suckler cow that was sort of half gone down against the wall carving, and anyway, it was a tight pull, and I was using the carving jack, and I wore those, which I don't know if anyone still does, the old-fashioned parturition gown that looked like a ballroom gown, like a wedding dress, wasn't it? A big gown.
Still my evening wear, Peter. Still my evening wear.
I've still got one, and it sort of flopped everywhere and got in the way, wasn't it? It had incredibly tight things around your arms, so your arms went numb after about a minute, and it had all this material in front of you. Anyway, I was trying to do the carving, and with the carving jack, and I think the calf was coming the right way, and I was cranking it out. And you know how it gets, you find the pressure getting a bit more and more on the carving jack, and you start to worry. You're thinking, this is a bit tighter than I want, and maybe I should be doing a cesarean, or do you keep going? And I thought, well, and it felt the calf, it didn't feel that big, and it felt like there was enough room. I thought, surely this calf will come out, and I was cranking that. It's getting harder and harder on the carving jack, and I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. I can't do. And eventually, I couldn't move the handle anymore. The calf was still only half out. And I realised that what would happen was so tight because my parturition gown had got wedged in the thread of the carving jack. So the whole mechanism was completely gummed up. And I was sort of stuck to the back of the cow with my jack and the thing. We're all up against the wall of the shippen. It's a complete display of incompetence, really. So eventually, I don't know, somehow I think I had to get to the farmer. I couldn't really move. The farmer had to go get a knife, and I cut a window out of the carving. Eventually we got the calf out, and that was the end of it. I just disappeared in a sort of fit of embarrassment. And the next day, the senior partner just came up to me quietly. He said, Peter, you have used a carving jack before. Obviously, there's been a bit of feedback from the disgruntled farmer. Yeah.
Well, I can give you a dog one, Nigel, if you like.
Okay, very quickly.
So,
amazing. You won't be amazed that we run out of time, but yes, do quickly.
All right, my first weekend on duty ever. Lady phoned up on the Sunday morning. A dog had broken its leg. So I said, right, you better bring it on in. So this very well-spoken lady came in with Yorkshire Terrier, and she'd loosened its collar off and put the leg up through the collar as a sling. Great. So one of the things she taught at college is you don't go straight to the problem. You actually examine the whole animal, check its temperature, pulse, respiration, colour. It's not in shock. It's not got blood loss. There's not any other problems. So I did all that. And I came to the leg, and I said to her, well, this is very clever what you've done here. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, the way you supported its leg through its collar. Oh, I didn't see that. So I just took the leg out, put the dog on the floor, and off he ran. One of my easiest broken legs.
Yes. Well, on that note, can I just thank you all immensely for your contributions. You've been wonderful entertainment. I can't believe an hour has just disappeared. So exactly as I'd hoped. We've learned lots, I think, about what we should and shouldn't do, particularly in relation to cats. So I hope all the participants have enjoyed it. Thank you for your questions. We will be holding another webinar between now and what would have been show day. As you know, unfortunately, we've had to cancel for obvious reasons. But having said that, between now and what would have been show day, there are numerous other activities going on. We have been able to reintroduce a number of our competitions. So the farms and the flocks competitions are going ahead. The gardens competition is going ahead. And there is going to be the horticultural show, all of which we're trying to do to provide some of the entertainment for our members and everybody else. It is obviously a shame we can't hold the full show, but I'm sure, and I know members understand why. It's just that it's been decided that it's just impossible to actually put it on in the way that we all know and love. So anyway, thank you again, gentlemen. Thank you everybody for watching, and the information regarding the next webinar will be posted as soon as we are able to do so. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.